Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, a horror series I'm amazed isn't talked about more, the Spectral Inspector books by Cooper S Beckett. Now, this is a great example of a series of books that somehow passed me by. I remember reading about the first of these books when it came out in 2019. So I remember reading a review of it on a website I used to write for at the time and thinking, that sounds good, I should read it. And then just never managed to get to it, as happens with so many books. There are now 3 books in that series, and I read them back to back over the weekend. I started the first one, I really enjoyed it, I couldn't put it down, I went straight on to the second one and then straight on to the third one. These are fantastic books and you really don't see them talked about a lot. So when I went to log my review of the first one on Goodreads, my review, or my rating, was the 100th rating. So this is a book that's been out for 5 years and it's only got 100 ratings. It deserves way more attention than that. It's a fantastic book. I think the first book, which is called Osgood As Gone, is my favourite in the series, but they are all excellent. They're all definitely worth your time. So in this video today, I want to talk a little bit about them. You may see them starting to be talked about a bit more. I hope that you will, because the third book is released today, the 29th of February, and the author, Cooper S Beckett, has been doing a bit of a push. So I've seen various people being approached, or heard of various people being approached to read the third book, and I am starting to see a few mentions of it on Instagram and places like that. But really seriously worth checking out if you like enjoyable, creepy, fast-paced horror with a bit of a queer bent to it as well. So what are the books? So the first book is Osgood As Gone, which, as I said, came out in 2019. The second is Osgood Riddance, which also came out in 2019. And the third one is the one that comes out today, that is As Good As She Gets. And they are about this character called Prudence Osgood, who is like a ghostbuster, a spectral inspector, as the title of the series puts it. So an occult detective for anyone who got involved in Occult Detective October last year. So, someone who investigates creepy goings-on, spooky goings-on, and tries to get to the bottom of them. In the case of these books, Prudence Osgood is a podcaster. So she has had a brief TV show in the past, and that's kind of part of her backstory and the backstory of one of the other characters. Now she's a podcaster, and in the first book she gets sent this weird email which doesn't really seem to make any sense, and it's about her and her partners trying to dig into this email and figure out what it's all about, and that leads them down a very creepy path that taps into one of my favourite kind of tropes in horror, which is cursed art. In this case, it's like a cursed album, a record album. And that first book has some wonderful kind of nostalgia for old technologies. So both, like vinyl, but also the kind of stuff you saw in the early days of the internet, like Justin.tv, I think it was called. So people like live streaming their lives. There's a whole load of stuff like that in the book. And Prudence Osgood is a fantastic central character for these books. So she's queer, she's pansexual, and completely unashamed about that. And it's, I wouldn't say it overwhelms the books, but it's certainly a central part of the books is her queer identity. But she's also a classic kind of PI in the traditional sense, in that she's quite self-destructive, so she's an alcoholic. She's really determined, she's really forthright, and you know that she's just going to keep on plugging away at these mysteries until she gets to the bottom of them. And that makes for a very engaging read. The books also have a fantastic kind of backup cast of characters. So, friends and lovers and things like that of Prudence's, and a couple of people who are like her partners in her Spectral Inspector endeavour, if you like. So people who help her out with her podcast and help her out with her investigations. And the first 2 books in the series kind of make up one story. So the first book is, you could read that in its own right and kind of leave it there, but it does have a cliffhanger ending, and the second book really carries on that story fantastically well. It reminded me a little bit of the kind of connection between the movies Alien and Aliens. So you can watch Alien on its own, but Aliens is a fantastic sequel and continues the story in a really interesting way and takes it in a slightly different direction. And that's true for the first two books in these series as well. The second book is just a fantastic sequel to the first. It picks up where the first one left off, but is kind of more fast-paced, more action-packed than the first one. The first book, in particular in this series, is deeply creepy. I really found it quite unsettling at times, but it's also entertaining and amusing. You get a wonderful kind of found family kind of a vibe from Prudence and her friends. So there's kind of a slight coziness to it as well as the creepiness. So both, work together as one long story really, really well, but you could read the first one on its own. The third book then feels quite separate from the others, and was published a lot more recently. So as I've said, that third book comes out in 2024, comes out today, whereas the first two books came out in 2019. So there's a big gap there, but it's not a gap that the author tries to kind of gloss over in terms of the lives of the characters. So he talks about the impact of COVID on society in those intervening years, and that actually works really, really well. So this third book, which you can read on its own, you could read this as a standalone, but I would really suggest starting from the beginning with this series because the first two books are so good, and the third book does spoil them a little bit. So the third book is more of a traditional detective style thing, but with a lot of horror elements, in that so Prudence and her friends get hired to investigate a series of suicides and murders of teenagers in Chicago. And that investigation takes them into some very, very creepy stuff again. So again, really, really entertaining, really gripping. I read that third book in one sitting. I just couldn't put it down. I had a free morning. I just sat down and read it cover to cover. It was fantastic. So this is a series I really, really seriously recommend to you. And as I say, a series that I don't see talked about enough. I really think if you're a fan of like entertaining horror that's a bit creepy, that's a bit cozy at times, but is also just really, really fun, then do check these books out. If you're a fan of queer horror, then definitely check them out. I thought this was a fantastic series and really definitely worth your time. So I hope you found that interesting. If you've read the Prudence Osgood books, please do let me know in the comments. Let me know what you thought of them. I really think they're excellent and not talked about nearly enough. Anyway, I will leave it there and say, as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.